It's been hard in the last year to get away from generative AI. If you tell someone you're recording their conversation with a community health worker, are they just going to perform for the microphone? What we decided to do was punish these countries for something they had no control over, and then exploit that information to build a better vaccine, trying to implement what is a pretty experimental technology in countries that don't have necessarily as strong a set of safeguards. It's everywhere, it's hard to get rid of, you have more than you need. You're better off transcribing it, translating it into English, and feeding that to the LLM than giving it the raw audio.
Hello and welcome to the BMJ Future Health Podcast. My name is Dr. Maxine McIntosh.
And I'm Dr. Cat Bruce. Maxine, how are you doing?
I'm really good. I'm very excited because by the time this podcast comes out, we will have launched at the BMJ Future Health event. It's so exciting.
I know, I'm so excited. It feels like such an important time to be talking about technology and health and science.
Absolutely. And also this really spicy mix of now more than ever needing more rigorous, more robust facts and evidence, but also the fact that we're weaving in these kind of weird quirks of what it means to develop and deploy these technologies, and the fact they're developed by real humans and impact real humans in different ways.
Totally.
Right, Kat, so what's on the lineup for this episode?
We're kicking off with something that's piqued your interest this week.
I'm bringing AI scribes to the table. So these are these automatic note takers, which we're seeing absolutely everywhere in doctor surgeries. Yeah.
And also hearing about them everywhere in different ways. AVT, ambient voice technology, virtual assistants, digital or ambient scribes, the list goes on.
Oh my God, there's so many of them. And our guest this week, we have got Dr. Bilal Mateen. And we thought he was very interesting because he's got this amazing global perspective on what it means to develop AI in particularly low resource settings. I find him just this amazingly sort of thoughtful and super dynamic guy, and he cares really, really deeply about making sure these technologies are safe and effective in low resource settings. He's the chief AI officer for a nonprofit based in the US called Path.
I can't wait to ask him about how you transposed Western technologies into other settings like countries in Africa, for example.
Completely. And actually, I think the language bit here is also really interesting because so many of these AI tools are based on language, and how on earth do we start to capture the true diversity of language and dialects across the African continent?
And once we've interrogated Bilal, we'll hear from our community, which I love that bit of the episode. Shall we start with the AI scribes then, Maxine?
So these AI scribes, they are popping up all over the place in GP surgeries, and a new study published in BMJ Digital Health and AI asked, how safe are they really? So in the study, the researchers tested several commercial systems across a range of different GP practices and found that all of the AIs left out at least some information.
Wow, that's really interesting. So do you think we should still be using them?
I mean, 100%. I mean, my husband is a GP and he swears by them, and I know many people across the country do. But I think what the study does raise is some really important questions about sort of patient safety. So if clinically important information is missing, but also who's legally responsible and accountable for what data is in your medical record.
Really complicated issues to tackle. How do we start to answer them?
So the study called for a range of different things. So first of all, treating these technologies like the medical tech that they really are. So regulated appropriately, clear safety rules, being very clear on who's accountable. But the one that I found very interesting is around making sure that these technologies are developed within local context. So the messy room, the dodgy microphone, the real accents, because really the local context strongly determines how well these tools work.
Definitely. And that's something that we're going to really dive into with Bilal, which I'm looking forward to. So let's get to that now.
Right. So before we get into the interview, Kat and I have had quite a lot of fun designing some interactive fun games. And this one was driven by the fact that we really didn't want to be one of those sort of waffly podcasts full of really awful jargon and buzzwords and vacuous claims. So I've got a bingo board of frequently used terms that mean nothing when it comes to health innovation. So these are things like revolutionize and like data is the new oil and generic statements about patient empowerment. So I've got these in my mind palace. And if you are to say any of these words, and I haven't quite decided whether you just say one of them or you say three. It depends how I feel on the day, how harsh. You will have to do a forfeit. This forfeit is either wearing some sort of disguise. I've got an ugly set of hats in my bag for our guests, or the guests will have to do some sort of physical challenge like 15 press-ups. So be warned, guests, that if you say these words, you might have to sit in a silly hat for the rest of the podcast.
An irrational person avoids saying them.
Yeah, exactly.
Unlike me, who's going to try and guess all of them.
Exactly. Now that I've said that, you're going to... Right. So we've got that out of the way. You know the conditions under which you have to speak now. But welcome to the studio, Bilal.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now full of trepidation.
Yeah.
I think we should also say, if the listeners have any suggestions for Maxine's Mind Bingo, then they should send them in, or comments will be on YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we've already given the listeners a little bit of a background as to who you are, and we've talked about you behind your back.
Very kind of you.
So we're looking forward to getting to know you better over the next little while. But we need to start with the important stuff to get that out the way. Bilal, please, can you tell us all the ways in which you are conflicted?
I work for an organization called PATH, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is an American international NGO. I have an honorary professorial chair at the University of Birmingham in machine learning for health. I occasionally advise folks at the World Health Organization, but don't get paid for it. And I work very hard not to own individual stocks and shares in any company, so that when I get asked this question, I don't have to say, I own stocks and shares in this company. I think that's everything.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bilal.
Well, thank you. I think I'm a bit nervous about whether I'm going to say any of those jargon words.
I've got so much power.
Just to be clear, I am trying to win bingo here.
So we start the podcast with asking the guests to bring in an object that helps share a personal anecdote around kind of why you're interested or invested in this space. So, Bilal, what did you bring into the studio with you?
So, I brought this. It is a water bottle. It is not the concept of a water bottle that got me excited about anything that I currently do. I don't know if the audience can see this. Maxine and Catherine, hopefully you can. On the front, it speaks of the Beijing 2008 Olympics. It's obvious if you've seen me that I did not compete. I actually got this when I was going to school in Singapore. So I was invited to a conference called the Global Issues Network Conference. It was held in Beijing in 2008. And the idea was it would bring together 500 students from around the world. We heard from a man called Jean-François Richard, who was the first European vice president of the World Bank. None of that really means anything, but he wrote an interesting book called High Noon, 20 Global Problems in 20 Years to Solve Them. He talked about the impact of climate change, infectious diseases, poverty, a slew of others. And we got to hear from him. And I was, I think, 12 at the time. We had Jane Goodall dial in for an hour and talk to us about her work.
Can you just describe who Jane Goodall is?
Jane Goodall is famous for hanging out with a bunch of apes in different parts of Africa. An absolute incredible advocate for conservation work, to be slightly more serious. She unfortunately passed away a couple of weeks ago. And I think many people have been reflecting on her legacy and her work in global ecological conservation. So it was a super interesting moment. And I think at the age of 12, it meant nothing to me. Like zero. I didn't appreciate it for the value and the uniqueness of the opportunity. And I was trying to figure out what I would bring to the podcast. And I was going, why do I work in global health? And I really do think it is these small things that happened throughout your life that you don't fully appreciate the value of, because I now find myself 23 years later working on climate change, working on global health, working for an NGO, despite the fact that at age 12, I would have told you I wanted to be an investment banker. Oh, God. So I brought in this little bottle as a reminder that it is the things you least expect that plant the seeds that 23 years later might define your career.
That is so profound. I think I've got one follow-up question.
Almost revolutionary.
Almost, but not quite. Can I just ask you one question?
Yeah,
what did you, when you were thinking around James Goodall's recent death, how did you reflect that back on yourself?
It is something that I think has become more and more relevant for me as I spend more time in the global health space, where I have the privilege of working in the UK, but the work that we are doing is happening in Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa, Nigeria. And we have to work with local partners. And I'm not going to say I have achieved Jane Goodall-like status, but lots of people have been, I think, criticizing her work for being such a visible advocate, and in part crowding out some of the local advocates who have been doing incredible conservation work across the continent of Africa. And I think that I do wake up quite often and go, does me being on this podcast talking about our work, does me showing up and giving a lecture on the grants that we have sometimes crowd out the partners that we have who well and truly are doing the work in country. So if you hear me say people's names, it is actually an ask to go look them up because they are the incredible folks that allow me to do stuff like this.
But yeah, we will list them on the show notes of the podcast.
Awesome.
Right. Okay, Bilal. So let's get into the meat of the podcast. So you are the inaugural Chief AI Officer at Path. And I'm sure in a day-to-day basis, you think about lots and lots of problems. And the way we like to kick off the podcast is to ask you, what is the problem that you're currently working on? Maybe even that's keeping you up at night. And can you tell the listeners also a little bit more about Path and your role in that to kind of paint a picture of the context of this problem? Take it away.
Would be delighted to. So the problem that is not keeping me up at night, nothing keeps me up at night, sleep is critical, is how do we make AI work for everyone everywhere? Really, the strategy, the vision, the mission of Path is closing the global health equity gap. We've been doing product development and innovation in the health space for almost 50 years. Arguably, what the organization is most famous for is bringing the first malaria vaccine to market in partnership with GSK and a whole series of other partners, GSK being the big pharmaceutical company. And my job is, okay, there are opportunities that AI affords us. It can accelerate the speed of science, the efficiency of science. It can help us with better program and service delivery. So thinking about all the clinical decision support tools, the algorithm that can spot breast cancer on a mammogram, tuberculosis on a chest X-ray. And as part of that, there are the algorithms themselves that we could be developing, right? It's not just the deployment, it's can we get the data to create something interesting? That's the 10,000-foot version of my job. It's been hard in the last year to get away from generative AI. It's almost impossible to be part of any AI conversation without someone telling you the question they asked ChatGPT.
Can I just ask, what is the difference for listeners between AI in the way that you've previously been saying it and now generative AI?
So the way I like to think about the, let's call them more historical applications of artificial intelligence, it's mostly machine learning. I have a data set. I take that data set. I train an algorithm to do a specific task. That example of being able to spot breast cancer on a mammogram. The generative AI stuff is a similar process of I have a data set. I train a slightly different algorithm. And what that algorithm is doing isn't spotting a pattern. It's trying to predict the next thing it's going to do. So the most common way this gets used is in large language models, where the slightly nuanced, lacking version of how they often get described is just the next word predictor. And it can then string together a sentence. What we found is that they're pretty good at predicting those sentences in healthcare settings. And they can often, if you give them information, diagnose a problem, right? So what's the example I'm going to use? Bilal has a headache. Bilal's lost feeling in his left arm. Bilal's left leg won't work. Bilal's probably had a stroke.
Good thing we're in the BMA house. We're surrounded by doctors.
Exactly.
You'll be okay. We don't need a large language model. We just go upstairs.
And you're a doctor yourself.
Yeah. Once upon a time, Catherine. No one should trust me to treat them. So we've really been thinking about applications of generative AI in low resource settings. And we've got different products that we're trialing in Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda right now. And we're learning a lot, right? How do you deal with the fact that you can't rely on constant internet or power access? How do you deal with the nuances of how language is used in different contexts, even how the English language is used by people in different contexts, and the ethics of trying to implement what is a pretty experimental technology in countries that don't have necessarily as strong a set of safeguards and guardrails as we're privileged to have in the UK.
And what's the reaction been when you've been working in these countries? You mentioned some of the countries earlier, but maybe you could give an example from one country that you've been to.
We're seeing a lot of excitement. I think we've had an incredible amount of support from the Ministry of Health and the government of Kenya for the trial that we're running there. I think other countries, we've had a fair degree of skepticism and pushback. So the example I like to use is the Rwanda National Ethics Committee pushed back really hard on the proposal that we had. And you're going to need a little bit of context. So in Rwanda, what we're trying to do is use something called ambient listening. So a community health worker, often someone without formal education in healthcare provision, usually a member of the community, goes out and is speaking to members of their community about what is ailing them. And what we're trying to do is get them to use a phone that can listen to the conversation between them and the prospective patient, the person, to capture that information in a way that doesn't confine that community health worker to just a checklist, right? To capture all of the other rich information that's being shared in the hopes of maybe identifying the problem that doesn't neatly fit in that flowchart. And the ethics committee was like, what you're proposing is just listening to very sensitive conversations using a machine. We would love to know how this information is being processed, who has access to it. Like, are you just shipping this to a server in the US and OpenAI is going to process it for you? Walk us through the data flow and the exposure. And are you not worried about what's called a Hawthorne effect, right? Performative behavior when people are being watched. When if you tell someone you're recording their conversation with a community health worker, are they just going to perform for the microphone? So some really, really interesting and valid concerns that we have been negotiating. We ended up changing the design of the study to answer really, I think, necessary questions around the acceptability of the technology and took a step back from trying to understand how effective it was before we'd done that.
So can we deep dive into some of those specific challenges you talked about? So I think the language heterogeneity is a really, really interesting one. Obviously, working ethically in a place that doesn't necessarily have maturity of the ethical safeguards is another one that I think is very interesting. But you rattled off so many. Let's pick one of them that you've found particularly interesting, and maybe one that you've maybe personally found a bit more challenging to tackle with from a kind of leadership and sort of reflection perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So Urdu is my mother tongue. I barely speak it. I understand what's going on. It's abominable if someone asks me to string together a sentence, and I'm sure there's many, many people that
feel like that. Are you going to try now?
Yeah,
no, absolutely not.
Perform for the microphone.
No, no.
It won't be on the bingo board.
Urdu is this critical language, and it's important because we have this partner, Mariam Mustafa. She's an assistant professor at LLMs, which is a university in Pakistan, and she's been creating this tool to try and reimagine how we deliver care in antenatal care settings. So instead of creating a solution that provides more and better information for the doctor, how do you start engaging directly with a woman who is pregnant or a person who's pregnant? Solicit information from them, provide them information and make them a better advocate when they go in front of the doctor, and give that doctor access to a structured version of the information like an electronic healthcare record. Basically service everyone, but don't forget about the person. Mm-hmm. Now, it's super hard to do that because one, you've got enormous literacy gaps. So what Mariam's found is that women prefer to use voice notes of a WhatsApp rather than typing. Mm-hmm. They can't always read the text, so you need to respond with a voice note as well. And the example that she has used that stuck in my head is women will refer to a big operation and a little operation. That means nothing out of context. Mm-hmm. It actually means a lot. A big operation is a C-section, a little operation is an episiotomy, which I'm not going to explain in any more detail because if you don't know what it is, bless you, don't look it up. Uncomfortable, to say the least. But that specific use of language is not something that a large language model would intuitively understand unless you create this kind of slang informal use of language dictionary that helps them understand. There's a whole table that I can send you that if you want to put up as part of the podcast, which just lists out all of the different ways how clots are referred to as like bits of meat that have been passed. Just wild. But clearly this is the informal use of language that women have just kind of naturally tended towards. So we have this in Urdu in Pakistan. I'm almost certain that if you tried to use that in Rwanda, no one would understand what on earth you were talking about. And there's this challenge, right? So we would love to be able to create a singular slang dictionary that works everywhere, some common core dictionary of the creative ways in which language gets used. And unfortunately, what we end up defaulting to is, and we've done some research to show this, is you get the best performance from a large language model when you give it the information when you're prompting it with in English. So if you're collecting language in Kenya, Rwanda, which is the national language of Rwanda, in any of the Nigerian common languages, Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, you're better off transcribing it, translating it into English, and feeding that to the LLM than giving it the raw audio or even the transcribed audio.
You can imagine the information loss across that,
Yeah.
and the information drift is probably huge.
And this somewhat, I don't know what the exact kind of formal language would be, but we are anchoring on this idea that only English can be used to communicate with these tools if you want them to be used most effectively. So that's the thing we're really struggling with. And it comes back to, I understand the language, I can understand what's being said, but even I default to English because I'm just more comfortable with it. And how are we encouraging people with the technology we're introducing to do the same, and disenfranchising a whole bunch of others as a consequence?
I think that we've now moved on to the next session. I think everyone's going to be thinking, like, how do we solve this?
How do we solve this? So some incredible investments have been made. So I have to give credit to, if you're in the UK, your tax dollars, pounds are being used well. FCDO, which is the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, which is the kind of the successor to what used to be the Department for International Development that does a lot of investment of our overseas development assistance funds. They've partnered with a series of NGOs in sub-Saharan Africa. I believe it's Masakane, which got the original grant. But they're trying to curate large data sets of African languages so that we can move away from this reliance. Right? This is a solvable problem. It's just that you have a lot more information expressed in English than you do in the languages we're talking about. And when you solve for that problem, suddenly we move away from this dependency we've built. So that's one critical piece. The other one is just invest in the human capital. I am not going to be the one to solve this problem. I do not understand the nuances of Kenya, Rwanda. There are brilliant researchers and product developers, and I'm going to name Samuel Rotunda, who's the chief technology officer at this startup we work with in Rwanda called Digital Umaganda. Has spent his entire career trying to build an open source tool that allows you to communicate in Kenya, Rwanda and manage language that's expressed using the language Kenya, Rwanda.
Can I ask about what you said in terms of curating data sets of African language? So at the start of the podcast, you said that everyone's very excited about doing this. And certainly we hear criticisms that FOMO is not a strategy. So fear of missing out is not a strategy. And there is something about working in artificial intelligence that you don't want to be left out of the football team. You know, everyone's doing it because everyone else is doing it and you sort of forget why you're doing it. If we look at the foundations that currently exist in some of these contexts, arguably they're not ripe enough to be doing work in generative AI, for example. A lot of it requires core investment, some of it which you referred to. So can you talk a little bit about how, to what extent it's sort of cart before the horse, or is it the fact that we've got this kind of excitement around generative AI gives us the ability to now invest in the foundations? Can you talk to us a bit about that balance?
So I'm going to use one of your bingo terms.
Fine.
Right? But I'm going to try and subvert it. Everyone talks about data is black gold, data is the new oil. It's not the new gold. There was this phenomenal Twitter post many years ago that everyone loves to repost because if you're in the know, you're in the know. Data is the new glitter, right? It's everywhere. It's hard to get rid of. You have more than you need.
Ooh, I love that.
I actually really like that.
Yeah, I love that.
That's definitely not on the bingo.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And more than often, it's just not useful, right? How often in your life are you glittering stuff? Okay, how often in my life am I glittering stuff? Never. And that's the challenge we've got. People talk about data for the purposes of saying we have data. The vast majority of it isn't useful for the task. And so it's a little bit performative. And the natural evolution we've gone through is from investing in the building of these data sets and saying, they have abstract generic value. You can do so many things with them. And where I hope we are heading, and many donors, philanthropists, investors, I can see getting to is, if you invest in the underlying data generating infrastructure, which we've done reasonably well in the UK, right? We collect routinely collected data, or we curate routinely collected data really well for the purposes of research. That's a function of having a robust underpinning infrastructure. So I would love to see some of that, hey, we need data for AI narrative kind of nudge towards, yeah, we should do the thing we've been saying we should do for the last 30 years, which is really unsexy, but needs to get done. But we're doing it for the purposes of AI now.
Okay. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
What would that mean for a patient, that the woman that refers to blood clots in her own language? Like, what would that change? What would that mean to them?
My hope is very little, because if we've started in a world where you don't have an effective electronic healthcare record that exists in your health system, I think we need to get slightly more creative than hey, we should implement an electronic healthcare record system exactly like we've done it elsewhere. So you speak to the Mariams of the world and they'll tell you, if I'm communicating with a woman and she's providing me information about her experience, the symptoms she is experiencing, I'm obliged to put that somewhere, right? So why can't I create some sort of structured record that she then becomes the owner of? And as she navigates a really fragmented healthcare system, unsurprisingly, she is the single common element. So why can't she show a QR code or a barcode to a clinician who goes, great, I can now see the web portal version of this and I can provide you better care. If you can't guarantee continuity through state-funded infrastructure, why not allow the person to be the conduit in the interim? I think this kind of federated data ecosystem where everyone owns their little piece or is the one managing it can get super complicated. And there are loads of ethical and logistical challenges. But in a world where you have nothing or you have very little, I don't think it's a million miles away from a sensible solution.
Right. I'm going to push you on some specifics of some of these solutions you're talking about.
Go on.
So
now I'm scared.
Two-part question.
Yeah.
Part one, what is data colonialism to you? And part two is, how are you working with local partners to tackle what you're going to define data colonialism to be?
So it's so many things, right? The first one and the one that comes to mind immediately is it's when high-income based groups are the ones exploiting information assets that come out of low and middle-income countries. And I'm going to take a hard tangent here for 30 seconds, right? Hard tangent. Okay. This became a huge thing during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had these DNA samples from variants of the COVID-19 pathogen virus that were popping up in South Africa, in China. And what we decided to do was punish these countries for something they had no control over and then exploit that information to build a better vaccine. Bananas.
And so by that you mean when we called things like the South African variant, and it was more that it had been identified in South Africa. It wasn't originating from South Africa.
No, and no one in South Africa went, you know what would be a great idea? Let's cultivate this thing and create a version of it that our vaccines are less effective against. So it has been a long-standing debate in the infectious diseases community. How do we encourage countries to share this kind of information? How do we make sure that, given that it is technically a natural resource, that there is some benefits sharing? So that is one major version of data colonialism that does keep me up at night. The other one is where it's kind of an extension, data not being exploited or being held by partners in countries. So there are the care principles, ensuring that indigenous peoples have the ability to govern how data is managed. Right? They should, given that they've generated, have some stake in ownership and control over who does what with it. What I will say to round that bit off is, what are we doing about it? We're being very intentional about going to the government partners that we have and saying, okay, we've generated this benchmarking data set. How do we help you be the ones to govern who gets access to it and for what purposes? It's not been straightforward, but we're excited that we are trying something different. And the downside of that will be slightly harder for everyone to get access to it because it's not freely, openly accessible, but it's an important thing to do.
So here at Future Health, we're all about kind of igniting and engaging a community of academics, industry people, clinicians, patients, doctors. What one thing can they do practically today, or one thing that they can reflect on today that related to what you've spoken about?
Doing research is a privilege. It requires people, the every person, to show up and be willing to engage. And I don't underestimate just what that is an ask of that person, that individual, when they have other things on their mind, right? You're there to seek care and someone is asking you to be part of a research study that benefits other people and maybe not you. My ask isn't, hey, say yes. My ask is, the more reflections we have about what made you want to say yes, what was a positive experience that made you think this has been handled well, the more of that reflection that we as researchers can hear, the more likely we are to do better, right? It's a privilege. I need to figure out how to get you to be interested and willing to engage with that. I don't think I ever get enough positive or negative feedback. I don't think any of us do in the research space. So that would be my ask of anyone listening.
Right, Bilal, home straight now. Welcome to the quick fire round.
Thank you.
What tech skills should every listener learn?
How to prompt a large language model. We all figured out how to do it with Google. The world's moved on.
Okay, question number 2. Bilal, where is your happy place?
The top of Primrose Hill. I go every year.
Which would you make illegal? Reply all, squeaky chairs, or tangled cables?
Oh, reply all. Seriously, should be a death sentence.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Bilal, for joining us and engaging in the silly games and the thoughtful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
And if people want to find out more about your work, where should they head?
The Path website or my LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, folks. Do I have to do push-ups now?
I really enjoy chatting to Bilal. I can't stop thinking about that water bottle.
I know. Has he even cleaned it? No, I'm joking.
I hope so.
I also loved the bit about blood clots as bits of meat. And I think it was, for me, such a good example that language is not the mere translation of words. It's the kind of way by which we make sense of culture and the metaphors we use to organise our communities and civilization. It's so interesting.
Really vivid imagery. And I think people listening to this podcast will probably live with hugely diverse populations. I mean, in London, I was just in A&E last week and I probably heard about 20 different languages spoken.
100%. I think this is almost wherever you are in the world, this is an issue of equity and ethics and patient safety. So our community section this week raised even more opportunities and challenges when it comes to these AI tools that we really need to be wary of. So we've got Cassie, who is both a patient and a carer based in Leeds in the UK, and she got in touch to tell us about how she's using AI to facilitate communication prior to her doctor's consultation. Let's hear it now.
A thought I'm having about AI in healthcare is that it can be a translator almost for me, how to translate my experience, my symptoms, what I live with day to day, into a way that the medical person receiving this information can understand from their side, and hopefully together we can have a collaboration of what actually works for me, rather than us both navigating the language of our lives, of our realms, of what we live every day. If AI could take that element out of it and help me manage my expectations and also help the medical person understand what I mean in my layman's terms, I'd be really excited to see that happen. One thing that would be in the back of my mind is who is controlling and influencing this information, and could they sway it to favour a certain type of treatment pathway or a certain type of surgical pathway, or could that be swayed depending on who is giving or receiving this information.
Thank you so much, Cassie, for getting in touch. I've actually never heard of or thought about that way of using an AI tool, and also a little bit concerned about the second part of her comment. Maxine, I think this might be your area.
Yeah, so what Cassie was talking about was to what extent these companies might sort of be pushing us to buy certain solutions or certain drugs or certain surgeries, is what Cassie said. So I was talking to a mate of mine who is a competition lawyer in technology, and she basically said it's all down to the business models underpinning these technologies. So if it's an ad-based business model, so something like Amazon's Alexa, you will definitely be pushed Amazon products as the sort of first port of call when you ask for advice. If a solution is a subscription-based technology, so something like OpenAI's ChatGPT, then the recommender system underpinning that is completely different, and it's not driven by what you're going to buy.
Fascinating. I could talk about this for hours, but that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening, and catch you next time. Goodbye.